Before I get started, please take a moment to consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. The returning viewership on the channel is going up, and subscribing makes it that much more likely that you'll see new videos as they're published. Sharing the video will help improve how the channel's videos are listed by the YouTube algorithm and help content reach new viewers. So what more is there to say about the Oceangate disaster that hasn't already been said? Especially since the release of the Netflix documentary, there's surely been another uptick in content on the topic. This is a question I've asked myself a lot in the last year or so as the United States Coast Guard hearings on the accident concluded, and more than 71 hours of those hearings were live streamed to the world. I'm not a materials engineer nor a maritime expert, but there is something that this tragic event highlights that I thought I would discuss that falls a bit outside the usual fare. I'm not going to rehash much of what has already been said by the Coast Guard hearings, the Netflix documentary, or other more qualified creators on YouTube on the accident. What I would like to wax philosophic about, though, is how this accident and the investigation into the culture at Oceangate highlights a significant problem with workplace safety initiatives on a wider scale. Up until the accident, if you watched press releases or read company statements, the impression you may have come away with is that this organization had built itself on intrinsically safe operational practices, rigorous safety testing procedures, and so many fail-safes both procedurally and technically that they were prepared for and expected failures and have overplanned accordingly.
And it's Bluetooth, so I can hand it to anybody. And it's meant for a 16-year-old to throw it around, and super durable. We keep a couple of spares on board just in case.
This has most conclusively been shown to have been, at best, a rose-colored glasses conclusion, and at worst, a blatant fallacy. I'm not going to talk much about a lot of the specifics of Oceangate for the majority of this video, so I encourage you to watch the Netflix documentary for an abridged version of the failures that led to the deaths of 5 people, including the Oceangate CEO. If you're feeling especially inquisitive, watch the Coast Guard hearings on YouTube. There's a link in the description. What I would like to spend time on is how Oceangate and many other organizations use safety to sell without being fully invested in the endeavor. Here's my hot take on life. People generally would like to survive the experiences they face and be unharmed. I know. That statement is certainly going to sweep the zeitgeist of human experience as a fascinating new insight into life and living it. The overwhelming majority of people would like not only to feel safe, but actually be safe. Believe it or not, though, this has been extensively studied in all manner of ways by academics, by businesses, by governments. For example, would you be terribly interested in buying a car model that readily caught fire in a rear-end collision or that had a throttle pedal that would stick down hard? The first example was that of a fundamental design flaw that basically discontinued the model and its name forever. Imagine if Ford released a new Pinto even today. How well do you think it would sell? Let's focus on the latter example, though. This is an issue that, likely due to a confluence of unrelated choices that were somewhat unpredictable, led to serious accidents and eventually a recall, as well it should have. But that only really manifested itself in a few cars from a specific manufacturer. Prior, there were decades of examples of cars being sold with floor mats from the factory and a statistically insignificant amount of incidents across the industry as a whole. But take a look at your OEM driver's side floor mat. Are there securing snaps on that mat to keep it from moving around? Is your car a Lexus? You probably get my point. Companies know that safety, or more accurately, a perceived danger, is a significant issue with, well, everyone. So they're willing to make changes to alleviate safety concerns and mitigate dangers, even if there's no evidence of an issue with their specific product. Now let's return to Oceangate for a moment. What they were selling was something that was basically brand new. Affordable deep ocean experiences to average people akin to the burgeoning space tourism industry. The only way this could be a viable, profitable business was in volume, taking the most paying customers possible on each trip. I think we can all agree that the experience itself would be extraordinary, and there are enough people in the world that could afford the cost that this really wouldn't be prohibitive to selling tickets. The issue to selling tickets would be the relatively well-known and intrinsic danger of death involved in the endeavor. It's well known that science knows more about the surface of Mars than we do about the deep ocean, and it's pretty evident as to why. There are vessels proven to be able to safely reach the deep ocean, but for a variety of very good reasons, they only hold 3, maybe 4 people max, and they're very expensive to build and maintain. This was the challenge of Oceangate's business model, convincing the potential pool of passengers that they had some guarantee of returning safe from the trip they signed up to take with new and unproven technologies. This is something present with most products and services from a consumer perspective. Is this safe to do, take, or use? Most of us answer that question internally fairly regularly, but think of what happens when information is shared about a product previously thought of as safe that even suggests that it may not be, especially with as easy as it has become to share information as decades progress. It's for this reason that companies, nearly from their onset, begin building what I call safety capital, especially when there is an inherent amount of danger associated with what they're selling. Downplay the negatives and promote the positives. Simple fact of advertising if ever there was one. Generally, though, there's likely to be an acknowledgement of the risks at some level. Think of all the medication commercials and their obligatory listing of risks and side effects. Let's look again at Oceangate and their image prior to the accident. First, they partnered with Boeing for a feasibility study on the concept of developing a carbon fiber hull in deep sea exploration. This resulted in recommendations that basically made the design, testing, and construction of the hull economically infeasible. The study was effectively discarded, but the fact that they worked with Boeing was still heavily touted to borrow safety capital from the more established company. They also worked with the University of Washington's Applied Physics Lab on their initial designs for their Cyclops 1 submersible, resulting in abandoning carbon fiber for steel for that particular vehicle. Again, though, Oceangate borrowed more safety capital from another organization. With this borrowed safety capital, and by hiring experts in appropriate fields of study and experts in maritime operations and a variety of other disciplines, they pushed forward. This is all very reasonable and what anyone would expect to happen during the development of new experimental technology, and Oceangate certainly knew it. Again, I'm not looking to rehash all of the testimony from the Coast Guard hearings, the Netflix documentary, or other sources, but the broad result was a spectacular tendency to ignore the advice of those experts, ignore the data collected internally and by those organizations, and the deaths of 5 people. What the culture of the company had actually built was an elaborately constructed illusion of safety on its outward face while blatantly ignoring and circumventing actual, real, practical safety measures at almost every level. The testimony to the Coast Guard by many ex-employees is consistent with a short-sighted organization led only by the dollar and its image in the public eye. Also keep in mind that the Titan sub and the company as a whole was in fact a lot of people's workplace.
As a submersible pilot, a diver, it is your right to demand to get information on something where you are putting yourself at risk. And it's to basically mitigate, potential for disaster.
At some point, safety just is pure waste. I mean, if you just want to be safe, don't get out of bed, don't get in your car, don't do anything. Yeah. At some point, you're going to take some risk, and it really is a risk-reward question. I said, I think I can do this just as safely by breaking the rules.
Believe it or not, safety is not the avoidance of risk. As I'm fond of saying, life is risk, manage it well. It's that last part that holds the heart of professional safety. Humans wouldn't have survived or crafted our modern world if we didn't take risks. But there's a huge difference in taking risks individually and selling risk to the uninformed or the ill-informed. I guess for me, the thing that angers me the most when I find it, and what the Oceangate disaster magnifies, is the hijacking of the concept and real goal of safety to mask a single-minded, willful ignorance of the hazards present in any endeavor. I'm reminded of Franz Reichelt, the tailor who tried to invent the first wearable parachute in the late 19th and early 20th century. Another noble endeavor, if ever there was one, but one that included many iterations, failed tests, attempts at improvements, but that eventually resulted in the death of Reichelt when he jumped from the Eiffel Tower wearing his invention after getting the permits to perform a test with a dummy. Reichelt was certainly looking for fame and profit by taking something dangerous and making it safer. He, like Stockton Rush, was inevitably killed by the fruits of that endeavor. Both ultimately achieved half their goal in their time, although definitely not the way that they would have liked. The difference, though, is that the Flying Tailor didn't start selling his invention after testing and practical failures, and when he ignored the advice of experts, colleagues, and friends, he only ever risked himself. I'm kind of meandering a little bit in the point that I'm trying to make, but for me, the lesson to take from Oceangate is to keep an eye on the differences between what a company or organization will publicize and what it knows internally when it comes to safety, especially in newer organizations that are looking to quote-unquote change the world with new ideas and new technology. Move fast and break stuff is great when it comes to creating new paradigms and innovating tech solutions to common problems, but when it comes to life and health, trust the data, trust the standards, but don't trust your gut. Oceangate was described as the SpaceX of the ocean, and that's what it wanted to be. There's just as much risk in space travel as there is in the deep ocean, but the demonstrated culture of each organization when it came to people's lives has been vastly different, along with the results. Risks to life and health exist everywhere, in every industry, and in every workplace. And I challenge everyone out there to widen their perspective to those risks, seek education on how to avoid them, and report those risks to your organization, or failing that, to an appropriate regulatory organization for investigation. Not everything garners attention like Oceangate, but the results are sometimes no less tragic, and they still happen all the time.
I'm never happy with any of the decisions that were potentially going into this project. That was pre and post manufacture of what was getting done. I was phased out completely.
Organizations, now more than ever, seem more concerned about the appearance of safe working environments in too many instances over actual safe working environments. The problem, as I see it, is that environmental health and safety departments, programs, and individuals have a tendency not only to be seen as a necessary evil of modern business, but as an active adversary to the overall goals of the organization. Why is that? Okay, so I've been shitting on companies a lot in this video, so you might be surprised by my opinion on that as well. It's both. That's probably a topic for another video at some point, but if there is an educational component to this largely opinionated video, I would like it to be this. Remember, everyone's on the same team at the end of the day. Organizations exist to fulfill their goals and in most cases to make profit, and EHS exists in those organizations to the same end. EHS exists not only to protect the individual, but to protect the organization from the negative impacts of safety issues. For organizational leadership, please keep this in mind when your own safety expert tells you that there's a mathematical certainty that an endeavor will fail catastrophically, especially when lives are in jeopardy. For safety professionals, keep this in mind. Enhancements in safety are often achieved in small steps, and you will have to accept that. Even in organizations with a great safety culture, you will be viewed as an adversary in a lot of cases. As I described safety capital earlier in this video, there's just as much organizational capital that you'll have to accumulate while building or making improvements to safety in your organization. Being right doesn't always make you effective. To everyone else, believe it or not, workplaces are orders of magnitude safer places to be as a whole, but that doesn't mean there isn't room for improvement, or that if your workplace is safe today, that it will always be. Oceangate didn't set out to kill 5 people, but as time went on, failures and setbacks accumulated, and finances grew tighter. Things like appointing an accountant as chief submersible pilot and firing their maritime operations expert and ignoring shocking signs of vehicle failure became the norm. Never stop advocating for safe working conditions and general safe practices. Was the goal worth the lives? Thank you for listening.